The importance of the IgG connection with Candida. There are laboratories, I know of two, one is in the US, and another in Spain that also measure the reaction. This delayed allergy response, this response that triggers IgG antibodies against Candida. It is a very important fact, as many times that increase in reactivity. That predisposition towards autoimmunity can be marked by a candidiasis. So, just removing foods, if we do not take into account this overgrowth of Candida, will not yield the appropriate results. For this reason, as for many others, there cannot be a protocol. In other words, we can create a framework, we can provide all the clues possible, but we cannot create a protocol, for example, for food allergy treatment, hypotherapy, what supplementation or protocol to follow. No, because we have to individualize and we need to know if this is triggered by a candidiasis or accompanied by a candidiasis or by other bacterial overgrowths. And it is almost always accompanied by the intestinal hyperpermeability syndrome. But it is not the same to treat increased intestinal permeability in the context of dysbiosis with an increase of proteolytics, or in a dysbiosis with parasites, or in a dysbiosis of another type. In other words, each dysbiosis is truly a scenario that completely requires individualization. That is why in the course we try to provide all the necessary information you have, all the elements, understand the topic of microbiota, and then know what to do based on clinical data, analytical data, and all the information you may have. Candida directly causes an increase in intestinal permeability. That is, it creates small microholes through which all kinds of substances circulating in the intestine filter. Autism, multiple sclerosis, depression, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all of these fall within the central sensitization syndromes that we will talk about a little more. In the section on histaminosis, I have expanded the content. I have prepared another presentation that was foundational, but I have enlarged it on histaminosis because the topic of histamine is super important, and it is also very important to be clear that there can be an increase in histamine or poor degradation for different reasons. Because just imagine, right? You ask what the treatment for non-allergic histaminosis is. It depends. It depends, because if there is histaminosis due to Down's deficiency, we can support with diamine oxidase and treat the intestine. But if what there is an excess in consumption, what we have to do is a low histamine diet. People, for example, who eat a lot of packaged, refrigerated, frozen food, who prepare meals, for example, for 3 days, will increase the amount of histamine. That food, which initially was not unhealthy, but over the days, more histamine accumulates. So sometimes there are dietary recommendations, a little support for the microbiota, and other times we will find that the cause of histamine is in the intestine, in parasites, or in the increase of proteolytic bacteria, multiple causes. And when there are multiple causes, there are different therapeutic paths. We cannot say that there is a single treatment for histaminosis. What there is a series of factors that we can relatively easily discriminate to know what we need to do. If someone has symptoms of histaminosis and it turns out they have parasites, then maybe it's just a matter of deworming and that's it. And in other cases, they may have a genetic deficiency of diamine oxidase, and then we need to support by providing this enzyme externally because that person is deficient in its production. And we will also see in this other presentation of histamine that the first thing we need to look at is whether the person is taking medications that inhibit diamine oxidase. If I don't take this into account, the person might spend half their life taking supplements and not realize that the cause of their deficiency is a medication, which might be changeable or not, but it's important to understand the problem. Well, all these cases, all the central sensitization syndromes can have food sensitivity type 3 as a causal factor. They can have other factors such as candidiasis. Dysbiosis is terribly implicated. Increased intestinal permeability, the presence of heavy metals, very commonly mercury, for example, in fibromyalgia, in multiple sclerosis, in all neurodegenerative conditions. And another factor to consider, apart from course, another aspect of this scheme for truly integrative work would be slow viruses, that is latent viruses, the Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, herpes simplex, herpes zoster. All these viruses remain once contact has been made. They stay in a latent manner, causing no problems. But if your immune system fails, if your microbiota is very poor, the immune system does not maintain a state of balance, they reactivate and cause real problems. It is not one, I would say it is never a single factor, but there may be a factor that has overflowed the barrel we talked about last week. That is to say, I can have the barrel full of heavy metals, glyphosate, disruptors, this, that. We keep adding, and then I have mononucleosis. And that can be the trigger. And I can affirm that I have felt unwell since the mononucleosis, since the infection of I don't know what, but it was the drop that overflowed the glass. It was what overflowed the barrel. In general, it is not a single factor unless that factor is of great impact. One can have a tremendous mononucleosis that leaves a dysbiotic scenario in the intestine because viral infections alter the gut microbiota, but normally it is transient. If the person has prior resilience, they have a certain stability in general after dysbiosis. Well, you recover after a few days. But if there was already a dysbiotic scenario, or if the impact of the infection has been very strong, it can leave a dysbiosis, does not resolve on its own. So it is very important to consider microbiota for, during, and after any infection. If we want to be strong against infections, microbiota is essential. You already know that 80% of the immune system depends on the state of the microbiota and the gut in general. But during an infection, the intake of probiotics helps in the fight. And if antibiotics are not being taken because the infection is bacterial, for example, the use of Enterococcus faecalis is fabulous because it stimulates the production of IgA and works very well in any process of itis, such as laryngitis, sinusitis, and cystitis. In other words, it doesn't matter. And then it is also interesting, I'm not saying always, but we should observe if the person, for example, after a viral infection has certain levels with diarrhea, with stools that are not completely solid, with stomach discomfort. Any change from their previous normality may indicate that we need to help that intestine. For this reason, diet in general is also very important, particularly when we are in combat and when we want to recover from any impact. A diet with an anti-inflammatory direction, at least a 1,000 diet without toxins. If we want to help recovery, help in the fight, food is always fundamental for many reasons. And probably the most important is the impact it has on the microbiota. It is unfortunate that we still see on television how for acute SARS-CoV infection, they recommended, I don't know, cookies and processed sweets, which are just the antithesis of health. So, well, I think it is also important that we keep this in mind. Of course, Candida, apart from having signs that indicate how people with systemic candidiasis usually have inflammation, retention, digestive discomfort, headaches, well, it is very varied and can be confused with other infections or other overgrowths. But it can make us suspect that they have taken antibiotics previously, that they take contraceptives. Contraceptives are very favorable for Candida. Chemotherapy, of course, steroids. That is any corticosteroid. High consumption of sugars and starches. All of this increases the probability and susceptibility that this fungus, which under normal conditions does not cause problems because it is part of our microbiota and fulfills functions. It's in that round form that does not cause problems, will transition to a form in mold mode and start to emit hyphae and colonize all the mucous membranes. There are tremendous candidiasis cases. From the mouth to the anus. I mean, a tremendous thing. So if things go that way, even if we follow a very restrictive diet, we won't be able to turn the situation around.